Hey, what is up guys? Mergenband4 here, and at long last, a new series of Doctor Who is here. It's been a very long wait, one of the longest between seasons in the show's history, certainly the longest I've ever been through. And while we have had Revolution of the Daleks in between, even that was 10 months ago. So it's been a very long time since we've had Doctor Who on our screens, and it is so exciting to have it back and to be able to say, there's new Doctor Who next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. Yeah, so without further ado, why don't we get right into my thoughts and opinions on the first chapter of Doctor Who, Flux. Trick or treat. I apologize for that really cheesy opening, but I couldn't resist. Our first Halloween episode. I'm actually really surprised that it's taken this long for Doctor Who to actually acknowledge Halloween, because they're such a good fit for each other, actually. They suit each other very well, and I mean, Halloween itself doesn't really play that big of a role in the episode, but it's still nice to have it like properly acknowledged. I'm sure it's been referenced before, although I can't think of any specific instances, but yeah, it's a good feel. And it's really fun to start a season on that. But yeah, as I said, the first chapter, back in, was it July with Comic-Con? It was announced that because of COVID and because they had to reduce the episode count for the season, they decided that they were going to do a single story across the entire season, which is something that Doctor Who has attempted before, but very rarely. And I was really interested to see how this was going to play out. Now, here's the thing. Whether or not the whole season ends up being a success or not, I hope this isn't something that the show adopts on a permanent basis. I'm a big fan of having those individual episodes that have little to no connection to any sort of overarching story. I like those, you know, simple Monster of the Week ones. So I hope that this doesn't become like a new standard necessarily, but because this is something that is so rare in Doctor Who's history, I was pretty excited to see what it was going to look like, especially because, you know, there are multiple different approaches you could take. Was this going to be like a regular season, but with all those individual episodes removed, just keeping the arc-related stuff? Or was it going to be kind of like The Key to Time, where you have still distinctive individual stories, but they have quite a strong connecting thread through them? Or is it going to be like Trial of a Time Lord, where you have a continuing narrative throughout the whole thing, but also kind of sub-stories within that? And I think with the Halloween Apocalypse, we've got, I mean, I don't think there's any other episode of the show that's quite like this one. It's very unique, and if there was ever any doubt before, because when they announced they were going to be doing individual titles, I was thinking, well, is this going to be another trial situation where you're going to have people debating, is it one story or is it a bunch of separate stories? But after that first episode, I think there's really no contention about it. This is one story. And we see all these different threads being set up in the episode, many of which we don't really know how exactly they're going to tie in, but I'll get into detail about those specifically in a bit, because there's actually quite a lot of them. But as a result of that, it's honestly really hard to come up with an opinion about this episode individually, because unlike most other multi-part stories, at least in the new series, where they're pretty distinctive on their own, they kind of tell an overall story, but each individual episode tells its own story in a way as well. This isn't really like that at all. This is pretty much pure setup. And I mean, it makes sense, because if you have something of this scale, you're going to have a lot more pieces to put down than if you're going to just be concluding the whole thing next week. And yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to see and to be able to speculate how these pieces are going to come together and where they're going to lead. And I think that's probably the key difference for me between this and, say, something like Ascension of the Cybermen, because when I watched that episode, I felt underwhelmed by it, and one of my main issues was it was pretty much all set up for the Timeless Children with very little individual payoff, and it's sort of a similar situation here. Not quite the same. There is some payoff stuff with like the Carvanista storyline, but I think the difference here is the scale of it is a lot different, because there's a lot more to set up. So I think it makes more sense for there to be less payoff here, if you know what I mean. Whatever the case, I didn't mind that as much, although I do think that it does feel a little bit overstuffed just because of how much is going on, but I'm not really sure that could be helped. Maybe a little bit. That being said, I think the only storyline that we were introduced to here that really didn't feel like it belonged at all was the one with the Williamson tunnels in Liverpool. We get a brief glimpse of that after the title sequence, just a couple of minutes worth, and then we get like a shot of Williamson himself as the episode's coming to a climax. But that's pretty much it. We have literally no idea how that's going to tie into the story, what it has to do with the Flux. Whereas at least with all the other strands, they tie back together to it somehow in this episode. Because, for example, with the Claire and Weeping Angel stuff, we don't really have any idea how that's going to tie into the Flux and the events that are going on here. But at least Claire does interact with the Doctor and Yaz. Or Vinder doesn't really have any connection to anything else going on, but he directly witnesses the Flux. So we have these storylines that are connected to individual elements, which I don't think really applies here to the Williamson tunnels. So hopefully we'll be able to see where that goes soon. If I'm not mistaken, Williamson is supposed to be in the next episode as well. But yeah, I find it a little bit strange that that was set up here when it has really no connection at all to anything else that's going on, at least not yet. But anyway, other than that, I think it's probably best if I just kind of start at the beginning and gradually go through, just because there is so much going on. I do really like that we start the episode mid-adventure with the Doctor and Yaz, who've been traveling on their own for quite some time. And I also like that that adventure ties in with the rest of the episode. It's not just some throwaway thing to reintroduce us to the characters. It is actually relevant to the story. So we gradually learn a little bit more about why they got caught up with Carvanista and what the Doctor's doing. And I want to say, actually, I really like Carvanista. He was a lot of fun. And I think one of the great things about that character was kind of subversion of expectations. You know, he looks kind of like a cuddly dog creature, but he's got a very harsh personality. And also, he starts out as a villain, but by the end of the episode, he becomes much more of an ally, which hasn't actually happened all that often in Doctor Who. And of course, Carvanista's storyline also ties into our introduction to new companion, Dan Lewis, who, first impressions, I really like him. He's a cool guy. John Bishop does a great job in this episode. I really like his sarcasm and wit. And he also just seems like a nice, caring guy. But my main issue with this is that because there's so much going on, we don't really get to know Dan that personally. We spend a little bit of time with him, but not a lot. And same goes for when he gets introduced to the Doctor and Yaz. It's a very quick introduction. He gets a very quick intro to the TARDIS. So we don't really get to spend a whole lot of time finding out who he is, because the story's got to spend time elsewhere. And because all of this is connected, I think my biggest worry is that that's going to continue throughout the season. That by the end of these 6 episodes, we still won't really know who Dan is beyond those basics. But I guess we'll have to see. Again, this is only the first episode and it has a lot of setting up to do, so my hope is the other episodes will be able to focus in more on specific elements rather than be just as crazy as this one. I expect the reason for the craziness in this episode is because of all the setting up it has to do. But yeah, I like Dan. I like the little banter he has with Carvanista. Actually, there's a lot of great comedy that came out of Carvanista and that whole situation that I really enjoyed. Yeah, I'm excited to see more of him next week. All that being said, it is slightly disappointing that we don't get a season of just the Doctor and Yaz, because the last 2 seasons we had 4 main cast members, and even though I've generally been quite a fan of the current era, I can't deny that one of its biggest issues is that it hasn't done a very good job at balancing those characters out. There's only a select few episodes that I can say did all the characters well and actually balanced them out decently. In the vast majority of episodes, you have characters being sidelined, and just having the Doctor and Yaz would really help to prevent that, especially since Yaz was one of the people who has frequently been sidelined before. So it was really nice to start out with just them, but I'm worried that adding someone new into the mix will also take away from that kind of focus again that we could have gotten. At the very least, though, we did get some good focus in this episode on the Doctor and Yaz's relationship, and I really liked that there was some tension there. There was some conflict with the Doctor keeping secrets, and it's nice to see that they're not always being on the same page, because one of the downsides of having 4 companions meant you couldn't really focus on that kind of stuff. You didn't have the time to have that kind of conflict, or if you did, it would have to be resolved really quickly because you've got so many characters. It's a lot easier to do that one-on-one, and it is still entirely possible to do that when you've got 3 TARDIS crew members, but it definitely isn't as easy. So yeah, it is a shame that we won't necessarily be getting that, but again, it was a nice start here, and hopefully that'll still be able to continue throughout the season, even with Dan's presence. I'm also very glad that this season seems to be continuing the storyline from the Timeless Children. I know it's been very controversial. I was actually a fan of it. I didn't think I would be going into it, but it won me around. And I was worried that because of the backlash, it would pull a Rise of Skywalker and either, just completely mess everything up and end up pleasing nobody. So I'm very happy to see it being explored further, because A, that'll continue to make the people who did enjoy the twist happy, and B, it gives the chance that people who were skeptical of it might actually end up coming around to it. Hopefully that'll be the case, and this will be explored in a sufficiently interesting way. I do really like the setup we've got for that exploration so far. We learned that the Doctor has been tracking Carvanista because he's the last known division agent that she can actually find. And also, I want to talk about Swarm, who seems to be the big bad of the season. And I'm very excited about this because the new series so rarely has a new villain as the primary antagonist of the season. I guess the last time we had that was as recently as Series 11, but that didn't really feel the same because there was no overarching story. It was more just like a bookend. So I think the last time before that it was a unique villain was the Silence in Series 6, which was a decade ago. So it's very exciting to me to have a main nemesis of the season be a unique creation, and I'm really looking forward to exploring Swarm because he seems really interesting. I love the concept of a villain who is intimately familiar with the Doctor, but the Doctor knows nothing about them. And I'm really interested to see that explored. I hope that gets explored. I would be very disappointed if that angle is just brought up and not really dealt with at all. But from what we've seen of Swarm, I think he's a really cool villain. I love the design of him. And he seems to have some really interesting abilities. He kills that division agent and uses it to kind of, I guess, he says renew. It's kind of like a regeneration. And I'm really excited to see where his storyline is going to go. He's also got the sister, Azure, I don't know how to pronounce it. She doesn't seem to be playing as big of a role. I'm not sure what's going to happen with her. I assume we'll find out more next week, but so far she hasn't really done anything in hasn't really been said if she has any sort of personal relationship with the Doctor like Swarm does. But yeah, I guess we'll have to see. We ended off with her luring in Dan's potential love interest, I guess, Diane, into this weird place. I don't really know why that's happening or how that connects to anything else, but yeah, I'm interested to see where that goes, because I really don't know what's happening there. Another thing, too, I want to mention is the TARDIS kind of going haywire. It goes through a lot in this episode, and the interior dimensions start going all wonky. You get another door at the other side of the console, and then coming out through the floor, and that's actually really interesting. It's some really striking imagery. It's interesting to see the kind of toll that this is having on the TARDIS. It's getting bashed around, and it starts leaking something at some point. So it seems like the TARDIS is potentially dying. I don't know where this storyline is going to go, but I think it's an interesting one. And I wonder if this means that the TARDIS will be completely put out of action before the end of the season somehow. But yeah, like with that, an enemy that knows the Doctor, and then the Flux, which I'll get into in a minute, all these different threats is really shaping up this season to be probably the grandest scale season there's been. Like they were not joking in the promotional stuff. Like there's so much going on, and the stakes are really high, and I am fascinated to see where it's going to go next. But yeah, connected to that, we have, of course, the series namesake, the Flux, which is this kind of universe-destroying entity thing, and it was really realized very interestingly. I love the way that it looked as you see it consuming these planets, and it seems to just be this unstoppable force. It's already destroyed a lot of the universe, including the Earth's solar system, so I mean, they're probably gonna have to do some sort of big reset thing, but that's hard to do in a really satisfying way. So, as I said, the stakes are really high, but it's a question of whether the resolution can feel deserved and not cheap. That's a really tough balance to strike. So, yeah, is Chibnall painting himself into a corner that's going to be pretty much impossible to get out of? Who knows? Guess we'll find out in a few weeks. But this is where we also meet Vinder for the first time, who doesn't really have much to do in this episode. He basically just discovers about the Flux and then flies off on his own. He was introduced at Comic-Con. The way they were talking about him made him sound almost like a fourth member of the TARDIS team, but I don't think he's actually going to become a companion. I think he's more just going to be a general ally, maybe like the Paternoster gang. I think the actor Jacob Anderson likened himself to kind of like River Song or like Osgood from Unit. So I think he's probably just going to be more a general ally, recurring character rather than a companion. But yeah, we don't really see much of him in this episode. He seems cool, I guess, but again, not really much to go off of. I think next week he'll be meeting at least Yaz based off of the promotional photos, but possibly the Doctor and Dan as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because right now, yeah, don't really have much to say about him. We also get our first glimpse at the brand new Sontarans in this episode, which I'm so excited for. It's been so long since a proper Sontaran story. Yeah, we've had Strax appear in few episodes, but none of them were based around Strax, and especially none based around Sontarans in general. And so I think the last proper Sontaran story we had was Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky, which was 2008. That was before I even became a Doctor Who fan. So having a new Sontaran story has been on my bucket list as long as I can remember as a fan. So I am so excited to see this. I love the redesign, how it harkens back to the original classic Sontaran design. I think it looks fantastic, and we don't really get to see too much. Really just a few lines of dialogue exchanged about the Flux. But we'll get to see more of them next week, and it was a nice little tease for that. I'm very excited to see them in full action in the next episode. But yeah, and then the Flux approaches Earth, and they can't seem to stop it. We get a little montage of all the different storylines we've been introduced to up to this point. And we end on the cliffhanger with the Flux approaching the TARDIS with seemingly no way out. And I love that final shot of the camera zooming towards the doors as the Flux approaches. What a great cliffhanger, although I'm sure the resolution... I mean, that's the problem with cliffhangers like that. The resolution is always going to seem a little too easy, so I'm hoping they can do something a little bit more clever than just something like the TARDIS used the HADs, but I expect that's probably what's going to be it. But the cliffhanger itself was very good. I really liked that cliffhanger. And I'm very happy. One of the best things about this being a single story is going to be getting cliffhangers every week. That's a great feeling, having a cliffhanger and then having to wait a week to find it out. I love it. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about the premiere. Overall, I did quite enjoy it. But like I said, it's really difficult to kind of judge on its own, because it's so very clearly tied into what happens next. I think I'll give it a score of a 7.5 because while I did enjoy it, I did think it did feel a little bit overstuffed and slightly messy at times, but it was definitely better on my second watch through. But yeah, it was good. It's got me really interested in what happens next, and I think that's the main important thing. This episode's job is to get you excited and interested in what's to come and just kind of introduce all the elements, which I think it does decently well. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for War of the Sontarans next week. I'll be interested to see how the Flux storyline continues, and please leave your thoughts on the Halloween apocalypse down below. And with that, Merganman4 over and out. I'll see you guys with War of the Sontarans.